Welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hello, I'm Bela Musitz, a former three-time entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and now the recently retired David D. Ray Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Clarkson University.
And coming to you from Münster, Germany, I'm Mike Wasserman, Professor of International Management at the Münster University of Applied Sciences. First, thanks for joining us. Listeners, we really hope you enjoyed today's podcast as much as we enjoyed creating it. Second, we always get questions about why we're doing this. And I like to start off by just mentioning, A, we're not making any money on this. But B, it really stems from a shared interest that Bela and I both have in learning from smart and interesting people. We're interested in figuring out how the world is changing. We're interested in how innovation and entrepreneurship are evolving. And we like to overlay our observations and compare them with the lessons that we've each learned over 3+ decades as entrepreneurs, investors, managers, and professors. To do this, we've put together a network of interesting friends, former students, and business partners, along with some new people we've met more recently, to bring you interesting stories, ideas, and insights into innovation, entrepreneurship, and the people that take unconventional paths to find happiness at work and in life.
Hey, Mike. So this week I spoke to Ravish Majithia. He's one of 3 co-founders and is the CEO of Magnum. It's a company that's really interesting. They're working on helping to solve the plastics pollution problem. So it's one that's certainly in the forefront of a lot of people's minds these days, and it's certainly a mission that's worthwhile chasing after. Ravish has a PhD in materials from Texas A&M and an MBA from Babson College. And here's yet another person that we've interviewed from Babson College. They're always number one in entrepreneurship, and they must be doing something right because they're certainly producing lots and lots of entrepreneurs. So what was one of the things that sort of struck you, Mike?
Well, Bela, I love packaging. I've always loved packaging. And it's one of these things that you take for granted most of the time, right? You touch it every single day. Everything that you buy in a store is packaging, right? And it's just a big part of the experience that we have as consumers that we often don't put a lot of thought into. So I thought this was a great topic. And I think that Ravish is a great person to talk through his approach to this. And I think combines common sense and some business savvy and some technical savvy all in a really cool package. So I'm excited to share this interview that you did with our listeners.
Yeah, I think it was a good one. So let's dive right into it. Here we go, folks. Ravish. Hello, podcast listeners. Bela here today. We have an interesting guest today. I am using Google Hangouts here, and I have Ravish Majithia here with me today. And he is an entrepreneur with an interesting background and actually a PhD from Texas A&M and an MBA from Babson College. So a great education. And he has an interesting story with a new business and product that I think will help potentially solve the big problem we have in the world with plastic bottles floating around in various different parts of the world, either in the oceans or on land. So welcome to the podcast, Ravish.
Thanks for having me, Bela. Nice to be here.
Oh, wonderful. So, Ravish, can you tell us a little bit about Magnum and what the company is and does?
Sure. So we at Magnum, we are essentially a materials company looking at the problem of packaging design. So most of our packaging is designed for the linear economy, wherein we make, we use, and we discard. Very little thought is put into the design of packaging when it comes to either reuse or recycle, or the so-called circular economy. So we at Magnum are designing packaging for the circular economy. Our innovation and the technology on which we are focused on are magnetizable inks, which become a design tool for packaging engineers and manufacturers so that packaging can be recycled at higher yields and can alleviate some of the environmental externalities that we currently see facing our world.
Oh, excellent. So, why is magnetic ink important in this circular economy?
Sure. So, no, I'd like to use the example of plastic bottles, not only because that's our first product, but also because it's a good example or a good representative example, I should add, of what the problem with packaging is. So, typically, most plastic beverage bottles are made of Type 1 or PET plastic, but they have a label on top, and the label can be made from a variety of different types of plastics. Now, it is that way because of a design to manufacture. Those labels are slapped onto the bottle and have a cost and a manufacturing design behind them of the way they are made. But they are not designed for recycling. Because they are different material altogether, they need to be separated away from the bottle during the recycle process. And that in and itself is a very large problem, a technical challenge that the recycling industry is not able to get over. So that's a design flaw in a package that we commonly use every day, which is really leading to very low bottle-to-bottle recycling. And that's where kind of our technology comes into play. At Magnomer, we are commercializing a novel magnetizable ink, which can be printed onto the label. And that means that the label can be simply magnetically separated away from the bottle, leading to higher recyclability and helping the bottle be more sustainable.
Oh, okay. So, just so I understand, let me try to play back what you just said. One of the challenges in recycling these plastic bottles is the label. And because typically these plastic bottles get ground up into little chunks, and the label gets ground up into little chunks, and then it's very difficult to separate them out. So by putting a magnetic ink into the ink that's printed on the label, you can pass these over a magnet, and it will lift the label material out, which is a different material that's not very recyclable, and leave the rest of the material that is recyclable to continue down the conveyor.
Absolutely. You got that spot on. Labels are the number one contaminant in bottle recycling. They account for almost 25% in yield losses, almost 10% in cost, and they're the single largest component of the recycling cost. So by having a magnetizable ink which gets printed on the label, that in on itself becomes a design tool for packaging engineers to make something that's more sustainable. And the recyclers simply use current existing magnets that they have to pick out the labels and make our bottles more recyclable.
So I think what you just said was that the recycling organizations or companies do not need to change anything in their process to do this. They already have magnets there bringing out random chunks of metal and other things. So this will no process change on the recycling side.
Absolutely. Magnets already exist and have existed in the recycling process for a number of years. They are, as you pointed out, they are there to remove metal contamination. These are small springs and bolts and whatnot. So the same infrastructure that already exists currently in the industry is what we are making use of and asking ourselves the question, what can we do from a packaging design standpoint so that we can complement the currently existing infrastructure, and our magnetizable ink printed on a label are effectively a change agent to do just that, complement the back end so that the front end becomes more sustainable.
Right. So now let me try to understand how the dynamics of the industry. If I'm a bottler and I'm filling bottles with soda, and do I have any responsibility for recycling those bottles?
Yes, currently there are, and we get asked this question all the time. So I'm glad you brought it up. Consumer brands, big consumer brands, are increasingly not only becoming aware, but putting steps in place to make sure that the packaging stays or becomes sustainable. And the reason that they're doing that can be classified in three buckets. The first is we as consumers are becoming more aware, and that affects their bottom line. So when plastic gets a bad rep, they they hear what we are saying and they want to change. They are not in the business of making packaging. They are in the business of selling us the ingredient, the soda or the water or whatever, right? So this becomes an element where for them innovation becomes key so that they can continue doing what they are doing. And the second element of it is building more trust into their brands, right? A lot of these companies want to do it. It's not just about, of course, it is about business sense, but they also want to make sure that we do not destroy our planet in the interest of just pure growth. Now, everyone sees the piles of plastic garbage in the ocean, and we see an image of that in the news like every other day, it looks like these days. So I think all of us are kind of equally horrified by that. And consumer brands are being responsible corporate citizens in changing that. But I think the bigger aspect of it also is, or the third aspect of it also is government regulation. You know, EU has currently passed a single plastics use regulation which requires recycled content of 25% in bottles by 2025. So that 25 by 25 regulation, as it's called, means that it's in the interest of consumer brands to increase the overall viability of recycling plastic bottles, because failing that, they will not be able to put a product on the shelves. So it's definitely a business risk for them that they are addressing right now.
Yeah, so the EU and other parts of the world seem to be much more aggressive in driving and regulating and requiring recycling than we are in the United States. So does that sort of mean you think your primary market's going to be in Europe to start with?
Well, the EU is definitely further along in terms of regulation. That is true. Even countries like Australia are much further along. But then even within the US, there are states like California who have similar bills currently under debate in the California state legislature, for example. So the regulation is oncoming in the US as well. From a customer perspective, we see definitely a slightly more interest in releasing these products or introducing them in the European market before in the American market is. But that's not to say that there is a lack of interest. It is just a slightly better incentive to do that in the European market.
Yeah. So, you are an element in this process chain of getting a bottle of water to me.
Right.
And so who is your customer? Who is the person that you sell your product to?
Right. So we think about our business model very similar to how toy companies think about theirs, where the person who is paying is the parent, but the person who is buying is the kid, right? And in our case, it's kind of similar. It's a consumer brands who are demanding action and who are asking for innovation. But the person we generate our revenue from are label manufacturers and label printers. But the costs are effectively transferred over to the consumer brand who ends up bearing the cost for this. The beauty about our innovation is because of the nature of it, we are effectively similar to adding just another ink onto the label. So we are talking about a very small percentage of the packaging cost, but delivering a huge benefit to the brand. So while yes, there is a small added cost to it, it is not it is well within the realm of what they anyways would do on their marketing side of things. And they are the ones who are the end customer and the end decision maker for us.
Right. I can certainly see a large consumer brand, whether it's plastic bottles that pickles come in or whether it's soda or water, that one of those brands embracing this and using it as part of their marketing campaign and their sort of brand image that they're building, that they're being conscientious, thoughtful recyclers. So talking about cost, approximately how much does it add to, however one measures the cost of a label?
Right. So approximately, and again, going back to bottles, the cost we add is roughly about 0.5% of the total packaging cost. So, bottles, of course, some of this does vary depending on label design and so on, but a typical bottle and along with the label costs about 5 cents. So you're talking about fractions of a cent of added cost per bottle. And delivering not just the sustainability value, but the marketing benefit that comes along with it.
And I assume that it must save money for the recycler because it's making their process more efficient.
Absolutely. It not only saves money for the recycler, it actually allows the recyclers to compete with the virgin plastic in the market and allows the consumer brands to buy a recycled plastic at a lower cost. So it ends up actually saving money to the consumer brand too, because consumer brands currently are paying anywhere between 10 to 15% premiums for recycled plastic and just for the marketing benefit of that being on their brand. So that the cost of that reduces out. So in overall, this actually becomes a cost positive for both the recycler and the brand.
Oh, very interesting. Well, cool. That was a sort of a great primer on sort of recycling plastics and all the various different elements of it. So let's take a step back. Can you talk a little bit about your upbringing and where you grew up and sort of entrepreneurial your entrepreneurial gene and where it came from and how it got turned on?
Absolutely. So I, as you can probably tell from my accent, I grew up in India, specifically in Mumbai. So it's a very densely populated town on the western coast of India. Growing up, both my mom's a teacher. She coaches or teaches math and science for middle school. And my dad himself worked in the pharma industry for a number of years and was a regional manager. And then when I was in my teens, decided to switch to becoming an entrepreneur himself. So in my formative years, almost, if you will, I saw my dad almost bootstrapping from being a manager in a decent sized firm, commanding a team of over 100 people, to going back and just bootstrapping and having a small team of 5 people to take a product to market. Now that was in a very different industry, but some of the things that I saw at that very early age kind of stuck by me, and it just was a very interesting and an exhilarating journey that we as a family went through. So I personally grew up, I always had a technical bent. As I said, my mom's a math and science teacher, so I became an engineer. I moved to the US to get my PhD in material science from Texas A&M. But the other person that really became instrumental in my overall formative years was my PhD advisor, who saw this entrepreneurial streak in me even as I was doing experiments in a lab, and helped me get an entrepreneurship minor in the Mays Business School at A&M. So all of that kind of was my training to become an entrepreneur. I guess in many ways I was waiting for the right idea or the right thing that would really call me to quit my job and like really throw myself full time to do a startup. And the idea behind Magnum seemed just like the right time when we started doing this back in 2016.
Okay. And so after you finished your PhD at Texas A&M, what did you do after that, immediately after that?
Yeah, I actually went out and got a job. I was a R&D engineer for Intel based out of their fab in Hillsboro, Oregon. So as a part of my job, it was again, speaking to my technical training of being a material scientist, I was helping Intel develop its, advanced manufacturing node for its new processor chipsets in their lithography division. So I did that for a number of years. In 2016 is kind of when the idea or the inspiration for using a magnetic functionality on packaging as a way to design them better came about. So I started dabbling in it in early 2016. I used that as an excuse to apply to business schools, and was fortunate enough to get into Babson College. So I joined Babson as an MBA candidate in 2017. And while I was an MBA candidate, started to talk to people to see if this could go from an idea to a business. Through that, I met my co-founders, and 2 years down the line, here we are with me being, now that I've already graduated with my MBA, me being full-time on Magnum and pushing this technology out to the market.
Yeah. So you left Intel and went back to school full-time at Babson?
Yes, I did. It was a very awkward career move to say. But I was in good company in Babson. There were a lot of people in a lot of students in my cohort who came from, you know, either strong technical backgrounds or very strong business backgrounds who were looking to take that next step in their career. So I was in good company, and that atmosphere and that overall camaraderie on the Babson campus really helped me, stay focused on what I needed to do.
Yes. Yeah. For our listeners, Babson is located near Boston in the United States, and it is always ranked number one in entrepreneurship.
That's right.
It is the place to go for entrepreneurship. And I actually taught there for a number of years in their Fast Track MBA, which is their 2-year part-time MBA program. That's done a combination of distance learning and face-to-face learning. So it is a marvelous place and a wonderful place for sure. And that was excellent. So I wanted to go back a little bit to sort of where the inspiration for this idea of magnetic ink came from. Were you taking a shower one day and you had the idea, or, I always like to explore that a little bit.
Something very close to that. I was actually on a flight, and flights. I think people have very mixed feelings when they are in an economy cabin in a flight, and to me it always seems so amazing that they try to reduce every ounce of weight that they can bring on board. To the point that I'm surprised they don't weigh people before they hop on board these days. But they were using something extremely primitive, i.e. a plastic cutlery on the flight during the food service portion of the flight. So it kind of struck me. And bear in mind, I was already in an atmosphere, in a place. I was living in Portland, Oregon, so a very environmentally conscious place.
Right.
The idea of recycling packaging and something that I was already researching in the background. Why is this such a big problem? Why are plastic bags such a big problem? Because as a material scientist, that never really made any sense to me, because the plastic in on itself is a recyclable material. So as I was sitting on that flight, and I see this plastic fork that they give me to finish my meal, I was like, if only this could be something I could recycle on board, they wouldn't have to throw this away so much, and they would probably reduce a little bit of weight there. And that kind of, I don't know what exactly was it, but the idea of using a magnetic label at that moment kind of really struck me as a very cool thing to do. And the more I talked to people about it, the more it started to seem to make sense, especially because magnetic separation is already used in the recycle industry as ways to separate out other elements. So, why not plastic? Why not do that? Why not design a plastic package so that it can be separated out? So that's how it crystallized. I know it's kind of sounds extremely naive the way I was thinking about it back then, but honestly, that's really how it came about.
So, was there a innate understanding you had of recycling and the process for recycling? Was that part of your PhD or your education, or did you just sort of self-learn that?
The process of recycling was something that I did teach myself. I did have an understanding of the problems that packaging goes through even before I started, teaching myself the nitty-gritties of the industry. And those problems are, again, a combination of, just having that technical training and, knowing that this item or this bag is recyclable, but it not being recycled was the one that drove that knowledge. And everywhere you look, it's actually not that difficult to find out, even if you spend like 20 minutes online, to see that it is the sorting of these materials that is the real problem. So it was kind of like, 2 and 2 making 22 for me at that point of time.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about, you've spent a lot of time in the education system, both in getting your PhD and then another 2 years, was it, at Babson to get your MBA?
Yeah, that's right.
So talk to me a little bit about your sort of motivation and thoughts about why you went back to get your MBA. You know, being a professor who teaches in an MBA program, I'm always interested in hearing students' sort of thought process to say, okay, I'm going to make this investment of time. And in your case, there's a significant opportunity cost there because you're foregoing, 2 years of employment at Intel. So talk to me about how you sort of thought about that.
So to me, it always came down to what I wanted to do with my life. I did enjoy my job at Intel. There's no doubt about that. I spent 4 very good years learning a lot of things that I otherwise would not have. But what ended up happening is I had this entrepreneurial switch in the back of my mind. And this idea seemed very fascinating. The idea of designing packaging with a magnetic element to it seemed very fascinating. As I said, I strongly believe in the the process of affordable loss. So in the process of evaluating on how I would go about doing this, I looked at MBA as a fail safe almost. In that if my entrepreneurial endeavors do not work out, I would have a degree to fall back on that would help me get back into the job market. Honestly, it was just me being, de-risking my time investment in Magnum. Of course, now that I've graduated and it's been more than a year since I've graduated and I'm still working on it, which is, it's always fortunate that I'm able to do what I wanted to begin with. But for me, the MBA was that fail safe. And the reason I chose Babson College was not just his reputation of being helping entrepreneurship and innovation, but also the kind of the ecosystem that I saw there. Really, I saw that as a way, as a support system for the company itself, where I could go potentially find co-founders or I could find, investors and so on.
Right.
So that was my reason to pick Babson College and pick an MBA, the 2-year MBA program.
Yeah, excellent. So talk a little bit about your co-founders. What are their skill sets and how did you guys meet and get connected?
One of my co-founders is Vishal Salian. He is a PhD in polymer science. He and I went to college together in Mumbai, and we have known each other for a number of years. And when I got into Babson and I started doing this, we were chatting about it and he got interested. So his skill sets were complementary to what I needed at the time, and also his overall ability to take the idea from this initial iterations from like very simple MVPs to more high fidelity prototypes was very helpful in its early days. I was able to convince him to hop on full time about a year and a half ago. And my second co-founder, Komaral, is an ink expert. He's someone that we seeked out, someone that we found after we were looking for the correct ink expert in the industry, because neither me or Vishal have. We both have materials and polymer expertise between the two of us, but do not have a industrial manufacturing and an ink expertise. So that is how we met our third co-founder.
Okay. Hang on just a second here. My phone is ringing and it's somehow ringing in through my Skype or my Hangout account because everything's linked in Google and it's driving me nuts. Okay, so that has stopped and I just got a new phone like 2 weeks ago and I'm still learning how to turn things on and off and silence things.
Yeah, notifications, right?
Yeah, exactly. Notifications have just turned out to be a big pain in the you-know-what.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And so between the three of you, sort of how do you divide up the responsibilities?
Sure. So Kumaral is our resident ink expert. He is the one who helps us with the manufacturing and the product development from an ink standpoint of where the magnetic functionality needs to be, and so on. Vishal is our COO and become an operation expert. So he's the one who marries the technical and the magnetic capability on the ink side to what it needs to be as it translates onto a specific packaging. So in our product tool set, we currently have inks for PET bottles, inks for HDPE bottles, inks for aluminum cans. So those, that's kind of operations and handling the translation of the technology onto packaging, what Vishal does. And I, even though I have a technical bent and have had a technical bent for a number of years, I have transitioned into a more of a business development and a marketing role within Magnum. So I lead the company as CEO, and my primary role is to interface with customers, help them work through our pilots, and work with not just making sure that the product is performing the way it should be, but also understanding what the next steps should be and kind of feeding them back to my other members of my team.
Yes. So is your product an ink, or is it an ingredient that you sell to the ink manufacturer today that they then incorporate into their ink?
No, so we have kind of integrated ourselves to do the ink in on itself. So the product itself is a magnetizable ink. Of course, there are variations with the different use cases and how it gets translated onto the package itself. But the product, it's an ink which integrates in the printing of any packaging or any label.
I see.
So depending on what the product is, we ourselves are become a plug and play product into the printing process.
Oh, excellent. So this sounds like one of those types of businesses where it might take a while to ramp up because, as you said, people want to qualify the paint, make sure it works, make sure it has shelf life, and all those types of things that they worry about. Because changing an ink or adding something to an ink or a paint is sort of a big decision. So how have you guys funded the business?
That's a great question. So we, as you pointed out, we have very long sales cycles, and that in effect means that we have to raise money. We have been very fortunate in not having to raise very vast amounts of money because of the value proposition that people see in us. So we have been customer funded. We've gotten revenue from customers even for prototyping and piloting on what could become an eventual product. We have been successful, reasonably successful in getting non-equity grants. So, shout out to Match Challenge. We were one of Match Challenge winners. For those of your listeners who don't know, Match Challenge is a high impact accelerator based in Boston, and they gave us a grant to do what we are doing. We also got a grant from Babson College. We won Babson's annual business plan competition, which allowed us to, keep pushing forward. So it's been a combination of grants and revenue that has kept us afloat.
Yeah. Grants are often a wonderful way of getting, your feet off the ground because it's non-dilutable. It doesn't cost you any equity in most
Absolutely.
cases, and it's they probably don't want me to say this, but it's as close to free money as you can get, I think.
Yes, it definitely the way we look at it is it not only helps us from a financial standpoint, but also validates our business model.
Sure.
From very unbiased, neutral stakeholders. So through the process of grants, even the ones that we have not won, we've made our business plan better and more robust from the feedback that we receive.
That's right.
Having said all of that, we are now in the middle of raising our seed round. So, there's only so much that grants and can help out. So yes, we are, of course, as we grow our business, we are raising our first investment round.
Oh, great! So you're looking at an angel round or a VCs or sort of what are you thinking?
Yeah,
of?
we are. So we are raising. We are not raising a very large round. We are raising about 750K. So we are looking at large angel groups or small VCs. Often family offices want to engage with us. So those are the type of investors that we are currently pitching to.
Yeah, excellent. And remind me where you are geographically.
So we are headquartered in Boston. We have testing facilities in Mumbai as well.
Yes. So, clearly you're in a sector where there are sources of financing that are focused on environmental challenges and recycling and stuff. So it's always good to be in a sector where you sort of had this, not just a financial return, but you have this sort of double mission or double return that you can generate. So that's a great place to be.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a number of organizations who have realized that packaging and specifically plastic packaging is becoming a big problem. And the term circular economy, even when I was in 2016, when I first heard of it, it wasn't something that most people knew. But today, when I talk to people about circular economy, I don't really have to explain what that means. So it's even in the last 3 years, it has changed a lot. So there's consumer awareness, which is leading to investment in the sector, which is always good for a startup like us.
Yeah, excellent. As you sort of think about, here's the question I wanted to ask you. I'm sorry. One of the things that students often struggle with is after I graduate, whether it be an MBA or whether it be my bachelor's degree or master's degree or PhD, and they're interested in entrepreneurship. Oftentimes students struggle with, should I start a business right away or should I go work for a larger company? And you went to work for Intel, you spent some time there, and then you went out on your own. So can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've I mean, as you pointed out, I've deliberated that decision a fair amount. For me, the reason to quit the job became my inherent belief in this technology and the idea of working and actually creating change. So I wanted to work in an area which I could easily spend 16 hours, 18 hours a day working on and still not be exhausted. So for me, Magnum became that obsession, if you will. That being said, there's always the concept of affordable loss. So every time we in our company, we've always had quarterly planning. So where do we need to reach and what do we need to do in order to reach there? And if we do not, what is our affordable loss? Right. So I've used that dictum personally and in our business, where we make a certain amount of investment, being time or money, and if we don't get to that particular milestone, we either look in a different direction, we pivot, or we call it what it is and say that okay, this is not working. And that's kind of what. So when I graduated out of Babson, for example, I had a 6-month plan in front of me that this is what I need to be at the end of 2018, which would be 6 months after I graduated. And because we hit those milestones, I was able to give myself one other year that, okay, this is where Magnum needs to be by the end of 2019. And kind of that's the phase that we are in right now.
Yeah. So you laid out a very thoughtful, almost toll gate-like process of I got to get to here. And if I get to here, then I'll keep going. But if I don't get there, then I need to reevaluate. I still may decide to keep going, but at least I need to reevaluate what I'm doing.
And we pivoted. So as you can imagine, this coatings or the ink technology can be applied to a variety of plastic packaging, right? In fact, the labels on bottles is a third use case, with the first two being plastic bottle caps and plastic cutlery, which are still items, are products in our kitty, but we found a lesser customer traction for. So we were able to pivot because we had those milestones in place that, hey, if we don't get a customer by time X, we maybe want to start looking at some of these other use cases. And kind of that's where, that was the impetus to, keep moving.
Yeah. If a student came to you who's going to be graduating in June, let's say, a year from now, or this December, whenever, and they said they had interest in entrepreneurism and they want to be an entrepreneur, but they're not quite sure if they have a good idea yet, and they're evaluating whether to go work in a Fortune 500 company or maybe join a relatively young startup. or maybe just kind of work on their idea a little more and develop it further. What sort of advice would you give them?
Go to Babson. Yeah, I mean, that's. I think I mean, I myself definitely went through that stage where there's an idea on paper, and I did not know if it was developed enough in order for me to jump on it and things like that. So I think the only advice I would give that person is look at what your personal finances are, see whether you can give yourself X number of months to keep doing or keep evaluating your idea. Talk to as many people as you can. I have always, I did not do this to begin with, but I've been continually surprised of how helpful people are in helping a young startup or helping someone who wants to, affect change in a certain direction. So, even if that person may not have the direct connection, they may lead you to someone who may be the right person to talk to. So, I would say talk to as many people as you can about the idea to flush it out. Find yourself what your affordable loss is, and go to Babson College.
Yeah. Because I get the impression, and maybe you can help me clarify this a little bit better, that you sort of had this idea when you went to Babson, and
Yes.
during that process at Babson, you were able to flush this out a little bit more, and flush is a bad word, to refine the idea a little
Right.
bit more, and come out of that 2-year process at Babson, not only gaining a whole new set of skills with entrepreneurship and business, but also feeling much stronger and better about your idea here.
Absolutely. I wrote my first 15-page business plan as a part of a class in Babson College in Dr. Andrew Corbett's class. I did. I've kind of practiced what I am preaching right now, where I spoke to as many people as I can. I spoke to the local primary sort stations in Wellesley, Massachusetts, where Babson College is. I spoke to some of the smaller consumer brands who are just starting out, so they were clearly not going to be my first customers, to kind of understand what their packaging choices were. And I went to conferences to just sit and listen in to understand what are the problems some of the industry leaders are talking about.
Right.
So those are the kind of things that help me refine that plan a little more. Understand what the specific pain point is and what I need to do when it comes to messaging to my customer. And all of those techniques, if you will, was something that I picked up because, of course, there was an intent to move in that direction, but also I always had this, running barometer that this is where I need to be in the next 6 weeks, and I need to talk to 10 people and figure out these 5 questions. So those were the kind of tools that I used.
Yeah, great. You've been a fabulous guest. We're approaching over 40 minutes here, and so it's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time, Ravish. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have, or something that you'd like to add?
No, I mean, I think we covered a fair amount of ground. I mean, one of the things that I always like to tell people is, if packaging in on itself is such a it almost gives there's a visceral reaction to what is happening currently in the world. So I am always, Magnum as a company, we are always open to feedback and advice and suggestions. So if there are investors or stakeholders, recyclers, consumer brands out there who may want to talk to us, we are all ears and open to chat to them. So.
Yeah, certainly. I will put links in your company website into the show notes here, so people will be able to reach out to you and get more information. You guys had a great video there that I watched about sort of the recycling piece, so that was very helpful. So again, thank you very much, Ravish, for being a guest on the podcast, and wish you the best. And thanks again, and have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Mike. I really enjoyed that conversation I had with Ravish. He was really a smart guy, very thoughtful, and also understanding. He understood that in order to be a successful entrepreneur, he needs to hone some of his entrepreneurial skills. And even though he took entrepreneurship as a minor at Texas A&M, he decided to go back to Babson and get an MBA and focus on entrepreneurship. And this was sort of one of his projects when he was there. His company, making these magnetized printing inks, kind of had its birth at Babson. So I think it was really kind of interesting, his approach in sort of understanding what some of the deep dive problems are in recycling plastic, right? I mean, everyone thinks, okay, plastic recycling, yeah, you just put it in the recycling bin and everything's done. Well, there's all sorts of sort of downstream issues and challenges that make, as I learned, make recycling plastic a challenge, and actually make using recycled plastics, putting them back into the stream, in other words, reusing them, actually more expensive than using virgin plastic material. So I think he's sort of diving into that. And I thought that was really interesting. What were some of the things that stood out for you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, like a good engineer, he really took kind of a Six Sigma approach and really worked backwards from this problem, this gap between what we want to be recycling and what we're actually recycling. And I think that is a huge blind spot in the life cycle of packaging. So I just love the fact that he got it down to the labels were a big problem and figuring out a way to print directly on plastic that doesn't add to the waste stream. So what a cool idea, cool solution, great example of diving down and really understanding the root causes of a problem and coming up with a solution that's both feasible, technically feasible, and also cost efficient and attractive. So this is cool. And I really like the level of detail that he talked about this. Sometimes we've talked with entrepreneurs and they're big picture people and they're idea people and they're creating this vision, right? And Ravish had this, but he also had obviously a ton of command over every little detail of this business. So I thought that was really cool. He talked a lot about the importance of the ecosystem that he gained through Babson, through the university, and how this ecosystem was his support network through the process of growing this business. And it's another example of the role of a university. We've talked to consultants, we've talked to coaches, we've talked to community leaders, we've talked to all these different ways that people develop as entrepreneurs. And this is a kind of a classic example of the university as the ecosystem. So I thought that was really cool in terms of his understanding and leveraging and giving back to that ecosystem.
Yeah, it really does speak to the fact that these ecosystems, whether they be part of a university or whether they be part of the region that you live in, and your other entrepreneurial community members, these ecosystems are really, really important because in this community of people trying to start businesses and grow businesses, there is this, and I know we talked about this in another podcast, there is this sort of community that comes together and people reach out and help each other. And I think that's a good point for folks to kind of ponder as they think about starting their business. I think in some businesses, location matters less than in other businesses. And you want to think that through as you think about a business you're growing or starting. You want to make sure you don't put yourself at a disadvantage because of where you're located. Now, I want to be careful when I say that because there's all sorts of folks who say, well, the town I live in is perfect and great. And that's wonderful. And I'm not trying to be negative at all here. But, the analogy I draw is if you want to be a country musician, if you want to start your career or build your career, you fundamentally have to go to Nashville because that is the epicenter of country music, I think fundamentally throughout the world. So it's going to be very difficult to build your career someplace else. So in some industries, that's really important. In other industries, it's less so. But in any of these cases, all of these regions of the country have these entrepreneurial communities that can help you and you can contribute to them, they can contribute back to you. And I think it's a really important aspect of growing a business.
But Bela, let's look at this from another perspective, okay? So if I want to be a country music star, I can now make really good music from my laptop, in my bathrobe, right? In my apartment, okay? So I think that, yeah, ultimately I need to be able to connect with people in Nashville, right? But a lot of what used to happen, the studio work, right, and the live shows and all these things, the way the music industry is transformed, a lot of this can be done digitally. So I think that we're in this phase where technology can substitute and can even be leveraged to be better than location in certain aspects of the process. Same with this, if I take an online MBA, right, which is obviously increasingly popular throughout at least the U.S., I need to be able to keep that network leveraged and use that network digitally because I might not be in the same location. So, I think that there's a real cool challenge. And I think that, again, we've talked before about how some people are able to manage in the digital world and some people are less adept at it. But it's really this idea of, hey, if I need to be in contact with people, I need to be in the right location. But I think if you don't need to be in the right place, there may be some ways digitally that if you're savvy that you can make up for that, or even do some things that improve it, that are better, where you have more access to a wider range of resources than if you were in a location. So I think there's two ways. I don't disagree with what you're saying at all, but I think there's a couple different ways to look at it, and the world's changing around us pretty rapidly.
Yeah, you're right, Mike, and I think that the point here is that you have to have that network and you have to have that community, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's digital or distance, whatever descriptors you want to use, you have to have it. So the challenge
or a
here,
hybrid, right?
Yeah,
could be a hybrid.
Yeah,
right?
It could be hybrid. The embodiment of it is not the important part. It's actually having that community. And I think that's the key here. So wherever you are, you got to figure out how to be engaged with the community that's important to you and your business. That's the key.
It's identifying these people and figuring out how you're going to connect with them, in person or online, right? It's like, what's my roadmap? Yeah?
That's right. That's the real important thing. There's one other thing that sort of struck me about this business. I sort of thought about it in context or in comparison to ThinkBoard, which was Hanson Grant, who was a couple of episodes ago. And he had a relatively, I'll use the word simple product, that he can sell direct to end users. And here with Ravish's product, he's selling ink that he sells to the label manufacturer, who sells the labels to the plastic bottle company, who then sells those to whoever puts whatever sauce or soda or whatever into the plastic bottle, who then sells it to the consumer, who then recycles it, and then it's the recycler who gets the benefit. So it's a long chain here. My point is that the person who gets the biggest benefit is not, in this case, the decision maker to who actually decides which ink they're going to buy to print on the label. So it's one of these businesses that has a lot of subtleties, and the food chain sort of is really long. And I think those businesses are challenging in that I think sometimes they're difficult to break into, but once you're in, it's also very sticky. In other words, it's hard to get displaced, right? Because the guy who's printing the labels probably has an ink supplier, and he's been using an ink supplier for a while, and he knows the ink works. He knows he doesn't, he's got good production, good reliability, etc. So for him to change ink suppliers is a pretty big risk. So it's going to take a while to convince him to change ink, and he's not the one that's getting the big benefit out of it. It's going to be the recycler, or as we sort of discussed in the interview, this is an opportunity for the brands that fill the bottles, whether it be Heinz ketchup or Coca-Cola, to take an active marketing approach and say, hey, our labels on our bottles are environmentally friendly, and can be much more easily recycled. So I think it's got this industry has this interesting dynamic, which I'm not sure we've seen before in any of our other podcast guests.
Bela, he's not printing on the labels, though. He's printing directly on the bottles,
No,
isn't he?
No. He's printing on the labels.
It's on the labels?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's printing on labels.
Right. Okay.
Because
but you can print on the same type of labels. The material is the same as the bottle? I thought the whole point was that the label wasn't recyclable.
That's right. So he's printing on the label with magnetic ink so that when they grind up the bottle that has the label on it, they can use a
the
magnet
label lifts off.
lift the label off.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
Yeah. Nope, you're right.
No, this is a good point. So we shouldn't edit this out, this conversation. We should leave it in the podcast.
We can leave it in. I don't mind embarrassing myself in front
it's
of an
not embarrassing
international
at all.
audience. I'm good at it.
Yeah, it's not embarrassing.
No, that made sense. All right. I was thinking it was the opposite. Okay. Refocus now. Another interesting thing that I thought was how easily he could recite what he learned in his MBA. I thought it was pretty cool that he took all these different approaches. Oh, yeah, we had customer focus. I did team building, implemented a strategy. I mean, this guy was textbook, right out of his master's program at Babson. So I thought that was really cool. It's the value of combining an engineering mindset with an entrepreneurial business mindset. It's not all that common, right? I mean, you did this, right? And we know a lot of people that have done this through our shared experiences. But it's actually a tough combination, right? And this is an example of somebody who really has the engineering mindset and an innovator's mindset and has wrapped it into one really nice package.
Yeah. No, he was quite the guy, and I wish him a great success. And whether this company makes it or not, who knows? But I know that he, as an individual, will be a very successful entrepreneur.
Yep. Cool solution, cool person.
Yeah. Wrap it up, Mike. What do you think?
Wrap it up. So listeners, thanks. We're happy that you joined us once again this week for yet another adventure. We hope that you found this interesting and thought-provoking, as obviously we did. And as usual, we have a couple of small requests. First is, we are always happy to hear from listeners. We encourage you, mentally incentivizing you even, to let us know if you have questions about what we discussed today, if you have suggestions about topics or some potential guests that we might want to interview in the near future. Please do get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com. And second, if you like what we're doing, please hit like or subscribe on your podcast app. And if you really want to go above and beyond for us, we would be eternally grateful if you wrote a short review on your favorite podcasting platform. And then, of course, if you know other people that might find us interesting, please share us with them.
All right. So that's it for this week. Thank you for spending time with us. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode. Signing off from upstate New York. See you later. This is Bela.
Thanks, Bela. Sounds great. And that's it from over here on the other side of the Atlantic in Münster, Germany. Have a great week, Bela, and everybody will talk to you in a week or so.
This podcast is produced for Mike and I by our friends at Busy Media of Schenectady, New York. They can be found at busymedia.co.